Welcome to an HTML introduction course. In this course I'm going to convert you from a complete beginner to HTML into a pretty confident programmer. So for this course you will need a text editor, like a code editor, ideally not Notepad. My choice personally is Sublime Text, but you can use like Notepad++ or there are other IDEs out there. You can really just search like HTML IDE, which is Integrated Development Environment, and there will be a few. The only real reason that you need one is for like syntax highlighting and some features that basically make programming easier. For something like a tab indentation, if any of you are familiar with other types of programming, it is neat to indent your code. So rather than all being on one line starting at the very left hand side of the document, each time you go into like a new statement, you nest it in, and that might sound a little bit complicated, but it'll all come in time. It's very simple once you get going. So let's begin. First off, what is HTML? So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which basically means it's a markup language, which means it doesn't have any logic involved. You're just telling the client this is where things are going to go, and it's hypertext because it's transferred over a hypertext transfer protocol. Essentially, HTML is just your website skeleton, meaning that you create a layout in your mind, and then you create the basics using HTML, and then you make it look good using CSS. So HTML by itself looks ugly. It looks terrible. It's really basic. We won't cover CSS in this lesson. Our next lesson will start on CSS, but until then the website we create will look pretty terrible. But just remember that next lesson we're going to make it look pretty decent, and it's going to look like a pretty good website, and you should be happy with it afterwards. And throughout the lessons we're going to make it look better and better, and we're going to add new pages and new features and start on things like JavaScript and maybe even PHP we might touch. So first off, we'll cover the basic code. So to do this, we're going to create a new folder. You can create it anywhere. I'm going to create it on my desktop. Create a new what's called text document for now. And if you're on Mac, this might be a little bit more difficult, but on Windows what we're going to do is we're just going to change the extension. Now when a web server goes to your website, the first file it's going to look for is called index. If it's a PHP file, then we'll look for index.php, which is prioritized over the HTML version, but we're going to put index.html. And when we press enter, it's going to be want to make sure we want to change this file extension, so now it is a HTML document. I'm going to open this. I'm going to open it with Chrome because it's already open. And you see there's nothing there at all. White page. And as you can see, it's actually going into our computer and grabbing this index.html. What we're going to do is we're going to open this. You can use Notepad++ if you want. I'm going to use Sublime Text. And you can see if you've named it HTML, it should say in the bottom right HTML. We're going to start with that basic layout. Now I do have a plugin called Emmet, which allows me to expand something like HTML5 out into a basic layout. I'm not going to use that because it's going to be a little bit too confusing. In future lessons we will. If you have Emmet, feel free, but chances are you won't. So the first line of code we need to create is called the Doctype. Okay. And this basically tells the client that we want the client to load HTML5. This is default for newer browsers, but certain browsers, like Internet Explorer, surprise surprise, have not yet done so. So you want to put this in here, because if you don't, then things that you use that are specific to HTML5 or things that are deprecated will all of a sudden start acting out. So we're going to keep it like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create an HTML tag. Now in HTML, this is a tag, this here. And most tags have a closing tag, which is basically the name of the tag again with a / in front of it. So that tells the browser, okay, in between here, this is in the HTML tag. This over here is not, but this is. Okay. So in here, this is where our website is going to be. Until we get into like PHP and things, for now, this is where our site is. We're not going to have anything outside, because anything outside will probably not work, depending on the browser. Some browsers fix it, like Google Chrome doesn't have a problem with it, but I know that things like Opera and things completely spaz out. It'll start displaying funky stuff like ASCII characters and things. So a tag is basically a part of HTML. It always follows the same syntax of open angle bracket, and then in here you have your tag name, tag name, and you close the angle bracket, and then you can put a /. Certain like certain text editors, code editors, will automatically do that for you. As you can see, it's purple, and as soon as I do backslash, it fills it in. You may have to just write it out. It really doesn't matter. I keep putting question mark. So the first thing we're going to do is do a really basic layout. So I'm going to do a head tag, and in the head tag, this is what you want to load before everything else. You don't want this to be at the bottom. This needs to be at the top of your document, and it needs to contain links to CSS style sheets, which we're going to get into next lesson. We're not going to get into that yet. It will also contain links to JavaScript libraries like jQuery. We'll get into that later on in the course when we start learning JavaScript. And it will also contain the title of the document and meta tags. We're not going to get into meta tags yet, just because it's a little bit too complicated, but we will get into them a few episodes into the course. For now, though, we're just going to do a title tag. And this is basically what appears in the tab. So if this was Google Chrome, you've got your tab name up here. The title, whatever we put in here, is going to come up here. So I'm just going to do my website. Okay? It's really a good habit to get into if you periodically save. So save or Control S, whichever one's easy for you. I would normally do Control S, but just for simplicity, I went to File menu. So basically, head tag contains part of the document that has to be loaded first. That's all you really need to know. Everything in the head tag is going to be loaded first. If something isn't found, it'll just skip over and cause an error, but everything in the head tag is loaded first. You don't want something in the body tag if it needs to be loaded first. Most of the time it will not need to be, but if you put the title down out of the head tag, it won't work. It has to be in the head tag, and there are a few things that are the same. The next tag we're going to do is the body tag, which is basically the meat of the document. The body tag is where you put all your visible content of your HTML document, such as images, texts, and forms. So, for instance, other tags that you'll be using in here are like p tags, which is basically just a paragraph, and it offers a few advantages over just text. Like if I put text like this and text in a p tag, there are a few advantages. This one will have a gap between the top of the paragraph and the bottom of the paragraph. So if that was a big paragraph, and for instance, I'm going to use a lorem, this big paragraph here, if we view this, if we just right click and go open in browser, you're going to see there is a gap between lorem and text. But if we get rid of the p tag, you'll see that that goes away and it bumps straight up. So a p tag will, like a paragraph, bump it down. It'll say, okay, I'm going to go to the next line now, and I'm going to add a little bit of a break, because this is a new paragraph. It's not just a new line in a paragraph, it's a completely different paragraph. If I put a line here, it's not all of a sudden going to have a big gap. It's just going to go on to another line. It actually looks like I didn't actually do that, just because you would normally do BR, and that's break line. In PHP and things, you might have seen /n, /n, which is basically new line, and break line is the same. It just creates a new line here, which is quite helpful. It's not really a good thing to get into, but loads of people do it, and it's pretty much accepted by the industry. It's fine. So there's your p tag. Offers a couple of advantages over other just plain text. It also allows your CSS document to directly target the p tag. Rather than targeting all the text in the document, you can specifically target any text in the document contained in a p tag, rather than the whole document. So that way you could give it a particular style, a particular font, or a particular font size, whatever it is you want to do. Completely up to you. When we get into that next lesson, you'll see it's really, really simple to do. So, if this isn't making sense, by the way, don't worry. We'll get into this as we progress through the lesson and the course. I'm not just going to assume you know it. I'm going to keep recapping it every time. I'm not just going to start writing a 300-line HTML document. I'm going to walk you through it up until the 20s kind of lesson. I'm not just going to all of a sudden leave you in the deep end. I'm going to make sure you understand. If you don't, leave me a comment and I'll make sure make recap videos. But if you really don't understand it, I really do suggest just watching the video again from the beginning once you finished it. So there are a couple more tags that we will need to learn. I will explain these using an example. Let's say we want to create a really basic website containing like a navigation bar at the top, like you see on Facebook and things. You have a little navigation bar at the top, that blue bar, or whatever color it is, I don't even know. And body containing just some basic text. We're going to create that now. First of all, we need to learn about semantic tags. A semantic tag is basically a tag that has no properties. It is just there for readability. You could have a div, and we'll get into those in a minute, but you could have a div with the class of nav, if you wanted to. But it is accepted by the community to use the nav tag, because things like Google, like the Google search crawler, that thing, mysterious thing, that goes through all the websites in the world, and checks for the navigations bar, and it will look for the nav tag. It won't look for a div with a class or an ID of nav or navigation or navigation bar. It's going to look for nav. It will go into nav and assume that the links in nav are on this website, and it will index those as well. So in here we are going to put a navigation bar. So to make a navigation bar we could use a couple of approaches, but the one that I'm going to show you isn't the only way. But it is kind of the easiest, and it is pretty readable, which is always great. You don't want to just think about, is this the easiest? Is it whatever reason you have behind using it? One of them has to be, is it readable? If I gave this to somebody else, would they understand what's happening? Or would it just look like a cluster of random text? Now, this is what I'm talking about when I look at indentation. Let's go back to that really quickly. You can see HTML. The head, the stuff in HTML, is not like this. It is out. Because if I compress everything in, all of a sudden that becomes really difficult to read. And as you start getting into hundreds of lines of code, it becomes impossible to read, especially when using something like JavaScript or Java, when it's just a lot of nesting. CSS not so much, but this is pretty necessary that you want to indent it, and in most places you mark down if you don't. So I would if I were you. So the way we're going to do this is by using a concept called listing. So you can use either an unordered or ordered list for listing. So you're probably thinking, what the heck are those? An ordered list is basically a numbered list. Now you can change these in CSS, but like I said, we're not going to get into those yet. A numbered list is basically, as you can assume, it's a number followed by some text, and another long number followed by some text, and you'll see this. And an ordered list is basically bullet pointed. For this task, we're going to use an unordered list because we don't need numbers, and we're also going to remove those later on. We're not even going to have dots. We don't want numbers though. We don't want to have number 1, home, number 2, about page, number 3, contact us. We don't want those. We don't want them to be numbered. So we're going to make an unordered list, which, as you can assume, the U and the L stand for unordered and list. In here, an unordered list uses a thing called a list item. And a list item is basically something that belongs to the list that can contain anything from text to another list if you wanted to. Our list items though are going to contain a link, so I'm going to do a list item, close that off. As you can see, we've all got closing tags. I'm going to open this list item, and just for readability I'm going to open it up again, and I'm going to put an A tag in there. Now an A tag is an anchor tag. If I expand this out, you can see it's pretty simple. An A tag is a link, basically. That's where when you click it, it takes you somewhere. If you want to have something that you can click and it doesn't take you anywhere, it's called a button, and we'll get into that later. But for this purpose, it's a navigation bar, so we want it so when you click it, you navigate elsewhere. So we're going to use an A tag because that's pretty obvious. In the href, you can see on here href, or href, however you want to say it. This is basically where we write our link. So this can contain a URL using www or HTTP, or a local link. Now we don't have a local link, but we will do soon. So for the meantime, we're going to put this to, let's just put google.co.nz. So we're going to take this to Google. So now that we've written in google.co.nz, what we're going to do is we're going to put what this is. So we're just going to go Google, right? And we're going to refresh the page. So in here, in between the closing tag of the closing bit, now this is actually a little bit weird. It's the same as the P tag. You've got your A tag. If I get rid of the href, you'll see what I mean. See, it's just an A tag, and in the A tag is what you want the user to see as the link. And then this href is an attribute, a tag attribute. and this will be covered next lesson when we create more pages for local oops, sorry, I bumped the mic. So we're going to cover local URLs next lesson when we create another page, but for now, href or href is an attribute of the a tag, so it's kind of straightforward, but if you don't understand, it's fine, it'll come to you. It's really quite simple. So you've got the a tag, and the href of this a tag is google.co.nz. If I refresh the page, you see now we see Google. If I click on Google, you're going to see it's going to take me to google.co.nz, and it's actually going to pass in that weird thing. Don't even know what that is, it wasn't me, it's just Google. So you can see, pretty straightforward, right? So now let's add in another one. Let's have this as home, and they aren't home of course, and we'll have another one, and this one is I'm gonna do them inline from this point onwards, just so you can see it expanded, but just for neatness we're gonna have it inline. And this one we're gonna have a hash. A hash means it's not gonna go anywhere. You click it and it just basically scrolls to the top of the page and doesn't do anything. It's simply there to say, okay, this isn't going anywhere, it's just an example link. And in here we're gonna put about, and in here we're gonna put contact. Whoops. Sorry about the keyboard, by the way. Now you see we have 3 links, and if we click on these, you see it just appended hash to it, and that doesn't do anything. But if we click home, we're still going to go to google.co.nz, because why not? Hold on a second, I'm just going to have it. Right. So now you're probably thinking, that looks absolutely horrendous, and you'd be right, it looks disgusting. But don't worry, we're going to get into that next lesson when we cover CSS. Now though, that's a navbar. Essentially, that's a navbar. Like I said, we're going to make it look nice next lesson, and we're going to add more pages, so it's actually going to do something. For now, that's done. Now we're going to go into our body, which we're already in. You can, by the way, you can also put this in a header. If you really want to keep it neat, you can do that. And this is just a little thing. You can just wrap it up in a header. So you see your header, and then in there we have our nav, and then we close the header, if you want to. Completely optional. I do it though just for the sake of neatness. And then I use a main tag, which is another semantic tag. Both of those are semantic tags. The header and main are semantic tags. They're purely there for readability. So this tells somebody reading your code, okay, they've got the body, this is their header, this is the head of the document, and then in the main, this is the main part of the document. So this is where we're going to put our stuff. And if it was a blog, then you'd have this as your header, and then in your main you'd have loads of articles. We're going to go into that as well, because article is a semantic tag, much like a side. And so you got a side there, and I believe we have section, which is like a section of writing. You could use a p tag, but if you've got like a point, to say if you're doing like a conclusion or a report on something, you could have a section with a header saying, okay, I'm going to talk about this now, and you could have 5 paragraphs in there in the section. A section isn't necessarily a p tag. It doesn't have to be a paragraph. It could contain multiple. It can contain anything, but if you'd used it for anything other than that, really, it'd kind of be a bit weird because it's not what they're used for. But again, semantic, use them for whatever the hell you want. First of all, we're going to do a header. So we're going to open up our h1 tag, and h1 is basically whatever you put in there is going to have a font size double that of the rest of the document. So if I had my website with a font size of 16 pixels, which is about average, then the h1 will be 32 pixels. That'll be the font size with 32 pixels. Doesn't really make any sense. I don't really know how 32 pixels work. I don't know how that distinguishes the size of the font. But 32 pixels is reasonably big, but you'll see that you'll probably want to change that later, and we will be doing that in CSS, because honestly, I don't think it's very big. I'm going to put my website in there. See, not massive. I've seen much bigger. For instance, mine. It gets a lot bigger because it's the header, and that is pretty small. That would be a subheading for me, but we can change that really easily. So we've got our h1 in there, and now let's say we just write a section, and then in here we put an h2, which is just a little bit smaller again. I think it's like 1.3 or sorry, 1.7 em. Em is equal measure. 1 em in this situation would be 16 pixels. 2 em would be 32. So it basically, you can do 1.5, which is 16 plus half, so I don't even 24 pixels. Basically, equal measure, 1 equals 16, and then you can do whatever you want to it. Then you do 1.1, 1.3, 100, doesn't matter, it's equal measure. like algebra, EM equals 16, and then the coefficient you put in front of EM distinguishes the font size. I'm going to do HL, and we're going to do my section, and then in here we're going to do a paragraph. I'm going to do some lorem ipsum. Don't know what lorem ipsum is, doesn't really matter. Google it if you want, but it's basically just placeholder text. And then we have my website, my section, and lorem ipsum dolor ciemet, or whatever the hell he's, I don't even know. Not my language, I don't know what this says. So, purely there for placeholder purposes. Don't judge me. This is our basic website. So, this concludes lesson 1. In this lesson we learned about basic HTML tags like HTML, doctype, head, title, body, header, main, and section. Those are just really basic. We've learned about p tags and headers, unordered lists, and LIs, and then another couple of semantic tags. So in the next lesson, we're going to learn about CSS to make the website look really nice, fancy smancy. So stay tuned for the next lesson, and I'll see you guys there. Bye bye.